Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I'm going to bore you with snapper. Dr. Sullivan, thank you.
We're very interested in Texas as well.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to be very honest. I need your help, your leadership on the snapper issue. The past several years have been incredibly controversial, and it's going to get so much more controversial tomorrow with the publication of the new rule. I understand that balancing the fish stock, balancing the accountability of commercial, for hire, and recreational. Some members choose to go all in with one sector. I don't. First thing I did when I got elected was I put together a council in my district, which includes NIMS, NOAA, and other agencies, as you know, of all three sectors, to try to figure out where the sectors could actually agree we needed improvement. And the one area, hands down, every single sector agrees on is data. Nobody believes the data. Nobody believes the data. Magnuson requires the use of best science in determining closures. We've seen snapper go from 75 days to 9 days, and I'm pretty sure after tomorrow's rule publication, we'll go to 6 days. But nobody believes the data behind the rules. And so as these rules are published and create such controversy, it's the underlying data behind that if we can improve the data collection and we can meet the requirements of Magnuson, if you can then justify those closures and the stakeholders believe the data, okay, that's fine. But there's such suspicion about the data that it creates the controversy behind the rules. And so my question for you is on your view of how are we achieving best science, how are you achieving best science ahead of any rule decisions determining closures to comply with Magnuson?
And could you talk about the rule itself that they're going to publish tomorrow?
So tomorrow's rule, well, perhaps if you want to explain the rule, it essentially is going to reduce, you're going to create a buffer zone to reduce the quota number or data number on which you allow for days by 20% to ensure there's no overage.
And
so essentially you're taking what had been 100% pool and reducing it to 80 to determine closures, which is part of the concern of recreational.
And based on what data, which is a really important question also when it comes to
sure.
weather data for global warming.
And I'll also share in its acknowledgement of the challenge you face, it is easy to get compliance and accountability from commercial because of the way it's regulated. It's slightly easier with for hire. Recreational, it's very difficult to determine their accountability. The challenge, though, it creates, though, is in musical chairs, when the music stops, recreational are the last people standing, and
right.
they have no ability for redress. So how are you complying with Magnuson's requirement of best science?
It's a complex issue and a complex question, but as you noted, it's a very important one and a very challenging one, in particular in the Gulf. Just as a backdrop, although it's counterintuitive, part of what we're dealing with here is a cognitive dissonance that comes from the success that actually has been achieved in the Gulf in actually rebuilding the stock. There are more snapper, and they are larger, and they are being seen now in places where they haven't been seen for decades. And all of that is thanks to the discipline and the self-sacrifice of constituents, including the recreational fishers.
If I may, though, that creates a circular argument. And I've had this conversation because if you declare the success of the past management plan because now we have more snapper than ever, why are the days going down?
Well, yes, so there's where the apparent inconsistency comes in. And the catch limits for snapper are set on weight. And so when you get bigger fish, fewer fish total up to that weight sooner, and that's had the sort of ironic and counterintuitive consequence of shortening the number of days because the weight quota is met faster with the bigger fish. I completely sympathize with the sort of clash that creates for your folks down in the Gulf.
And in Texas, I'm keenly interested in this question, so no, don't be constrained, Mr. Jolly, by that light.
I've got a solution for you.
Okay. I know it goes all across around the Gulf states.
And you're going to hear about salmon from the West Coast.
I suspected that might be the case. With respect to data, and our Southeast region is actually a good example, is we have completely open data calls. Anybody, any party can bring data, and it's everyone adjudicates and debates which data meet the quality standards that the council has agreed must be met for anybody's data to be accepted. If one of my guys brings a study in that doesn't meet those standards, it doesn't get included in the data that will go into the assessment. So we do use outside data. We rely on it.
Well, you make the call for data, But I can tell you, those who try to participate feel as though they really don't have a seat at the table, that
And
it's
is the
not
whole
considered.
process transparent and the data out there for independent verification?
It is?
So let me ask you a question. I realize the time is up. Let me ask you your opinion on a model that has come out of my council. And understand the council includes all sectors. We've had representatives from your agency, from NIMS, from state regulators sit at the table as well with us to brainstorm on things. Staying out of the controversy of days and catch shares. If the issue is data that everybody agrees on, everybody's suspicious of, they feel like they don't have a seat at the table, they can submit proposals, they get rejected. How about this model? The agency currently has cooperative research institutes. What if under the jurisdiction of NIMS, so within the jurisdiction and control of your agency, there was a cooperative research institute that existed with personnel as well as funding to let out competitively awarded peer-reviewed research contracts, so that rather than making the decision when the data is presented, you're actually making the decision on proposals submitted by third-party data collectors. It could be major research universities. It could be commercial fishermen who have a GPS iPhone data system that works. It could be recreational. But it would be, one, it would bring them to the table. It would be their opportunity to participate, and if they chose not to, well, then shame on them. But to have a cooperative research institute under Mr. Crabtree's jurisdiction to let out competitive contracts to research universities, recreational angler groups, commercial and others that met peer-reviewed processes, let out the contracts. That information then is owned by NIMS, and we know has to then be incorporated because they've approved the manner in which it's being collected. Would that be a way to satisfy the?
Well, we do fund, and I know, Mr. Crabtree, I can get the statistics for you and give you a more detailed briefing. That is the purpose of NIMS cooperative research. We don't have to establish and pay the overhead of having an institute per se, because the cooperative research budget lines that we have within NIMS are intended to do exactly that. I'd be happy to get the detailed data on how much cooperative research is being done and associated with snapper across the Gulf. Whoever does that cooperative research and whoever collects those data on the back end, the data have to pass a peer review, be accepted into, so I mean, if my guys could go out and do a bad job on a cruise too. We don't want their data going in unquality checked. So I would prefer to not put extra overhead expenses into setting up an institute per se with all the administrivia that might come along with that.
But here's,
I'd like to bring back the data on what cooperative research is actually currently being done with respect to snapper in the Gulf. I don't know those figures. I don't know the dollar values or the participants.
and being incorporated into the closure decisions.
Certainly worth looking at.
Because,
That is exactly
because here's the other
intent.
thing I think we would accomplish with that. We would eliminate the suspicion by the sector participants, particularly recreational, who believe today, and I know you know this, but I live it. They do not believe that they have a seat at the table. They believe they see more fish than they've ever seen before, and they see a constant reduction annually of the days they're allowed to fish, and it doesn't make sense. And the more people I hear from the agency who say, our plan is working, then I ask the question, are you declaring success? Because if you're declaring success, then tomorrow's rule is not necessary. And so there are more fish than ever, and yet our recreational guys, and listen, this means something in communities on quality of life, of course, but it also means things for our economy. This is a very fragile economic model, and it is destructive to the quality of life to coastal communities. And so I started by saying I need your help, and I mean that to set a tone that I'm not beating up on the agency, but I'm telling you what's being implemented right now is broken. And I've tried to find a solution we've gotten to this Cooperative Research Institute idea. And I'll be honest, I appreciate that you've said there is cooperative research going on. From this committee's perspective and from compliance with Magnuson, unless you can demonstrate the teeth behind that and our ability to provide accountability and oversight of the third-party data that is including everybody, I still would want to push for something that establishes a cooperative research institute that we know is accountable. So, And Dr. Sullivan, I appreciate very much your willingness to engage in this conversation.
Very much willing to follow up with you, Mr. Jolly.
Thank you.
And I'd like to offer maybe